Here's a question that shows how rather silly the idea of a soul is.
There are generally two Christian views on ensoulment. There's creationism and there's traducianism. Now, the creationist view says that God creates a new soul ex nihilo, out of nothing, at conception or at some point after conception, but of course before birth. Now, creationists agree that a new soul is directly made by God, but they differ as to when ensoulment occurs. Now, the traducianist position holds that each soul is generated by his or her parents as a function of their procreative act. Now, in this view, ensoulment can only occur at the moment of conception.
The Catholic Church used to base its position on Aristotle's theory of ensoulment. Aristotle believed that there are plant souls, non-human animal souls, and human souls. He believed that at conception, the embryo had a plant soul. Sometime during pregnancy, it gained an animal soul. Then once the fetus started moving, it gained a human soul. It wasn't until a papal bull was issued in 1869 that the Church ceased to make these ensoulment distinctions.
The question then is, if a human embryo twins, as in monozygotic or identical twins, what happens? Does a single soul split or something else? Well, the answer will probably depend on your view of when ensoulment occurs. If you're a creationist and you believe that ensoulment occurs sometime after conception, well then you potentially avoid the difficult question of how twins get their souls. You could simply say, well, God gives each twin a soul after the embryo splits, but sometime before the twins are born. Very simple. But if you believe ensoulment occurs at conception, which could be a creationist or a traducianist, by the way, then it seems that there are two options. You can claim that God creates the two souls for the one zygote, and then once it splits, each soul follows a single embryo. Or you can say there is only one soul initially, and when the embryo twins, that's when God creates another soul and gives it to the other twin.
What seems to be off the table is the idea that one soul can be made into two souls. But here's another scenario. Sometimes people with severe epilepsy, in order to reduce their seizures, will have their corpus callosum severed, such that the left and right hemispheres of the brain can no longer communicate with one another. What appears to happen to patients who have this procedure is that they have two distinct consciousnesses. Whether this is actually the case is debated, but suppose there are essentially two separate persons in one body. What are the theological implications of this? Is a new soul created when the hemispheres are separated? Did the person always have two souls and they just separated at the point of the surgery? If a second soul is created, does it get the right hemisphere or the left hemisphere? If a new soul is created, it would retain at least some of the memories and personality of the original soul, so it wouldn't be made out of nothing. Here's an interesting video of V.S. Ramachandran talking about this phenomenon.
Now let's get to the neurology, and one group of patients we have studied is split brain patients or commissurotomy patients. These are people whose corpus callosum has been cut, and anterior commissure and massa intermedia whenever encountered. So essentially you're doing a karate chop right through the head and creating two human beings in one body, in one skull, two spheres of consciousness. Now, many experiments have been done on these people, and I asked myself a very simple question. Okay, you've created two people here. What about their personalities? Do they have different personalities? What about their aesthetic preferences? Does one like blondes and the other like brunettes, for example? One like chocolate and the other like vanilla? What happens? So we tried these experiments, and what we did was we had to first train the right hemisphere to communicate with us. In fact, the right hemisphere can read simple commands, simple words, simple sentences. And then you ask a question and say, point to a box, yes, no, I don't know. Because it can't talk. The right hemisphere cannot talk. But it can comprehend simple semantics, simple questions. Left hemisphere, of course, can talk. So you can present boxes, yes, no, I don't know. So we asked, for example, are you at Caltech? And the right hemisphere pointed to yes. Are you on the moon? It said no. Are you in California? It said yes. Are you asleep? He said, no. Then I said, are you a woman? And the patient was male. And he pointed to yes. And then started chuckling and laughing. So at least the right hemisphere has a sense of humor. Okay, so now comes the big question. What if you ask, do you believe in God? So I said, do you believe in God? And the right hemisphere went straight to yes. Right? Asked the same question to the left hemisphere, yes, no, I don't know. It went to no. Right? So here's a human being whose right hemisphere is an atheist, and left hemisphere, on the other hand, believes in God. And this finding should have sent a tsunami through the theological community, but barely produced a ripple, because it raises all kinds of profound theological questions. If this person dies, what happens? Does one hemisphere go to heaven and the other go to hell? I don't know the answer to that.
Also, what is a soul supposed to be made of? How is it able to interact with matter? Why can it seemingly only interact with the brain? How is it that changing the brain seems to affect the soul? If the soul does exert some causal influence on the brain, there would be extra energy applied to the brain, so why don't we see this extra energy? It's almost as if it's a simpler explanation to just say that the mind is something the brain does rather than being some entirely distinct and mysterious entity. Now, I know the idealists will say that there really is no problem with the mind interacting with the body because everything is fundamentally mental. This doesn't really get rid of the interaction problem, though. Everything we see interacting with anything does so through one of four forces: the weak and strong nuclear forces, the electromagnetic force, and gravity. Even if the mind and body are both mental, either there is some distinct form of interaction between these mental things that we've never been able to detect, or the mind and body are interacting through one of the four fundamental forces, which would also be an interaction that we've never been able to detect.